I have often wondered if the greatest tragedies in life aren't the loud, explosive moments that tear the sky open, but rather the quiet, suffocating ones that happen in beautiful rooms filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the soft clink of crystal glasses, which is exactly where I found myself the day my own daughter decided I wasn't good enough to witness her happiness. I was sitting in the corner of the rehearsal dinner venue, a sprawling country club in Connecticut with vaulted ceilings and mahogany beams that seemed to look down on me with the same judgment as the guests, wearing the only suit I had owned for the last 15 years. A charcoal gray number that had seen better days, with a shine on the elbows and a slight fray at the hem that I had tried to trim with nail scissors that morning, thinking that if I just looked tidy enough, no one would notice that Arthur Miller, the retired mechanic from the gritty side of town, didn't belong in the world of the Vanderbilts and the Ashtons. My daughter Jessica was glowing, moving through the crowd in a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my truck, her arm linked through Julian's, a man whose smile was as polished as his Italian loafers and whose eyes always seemed to slide right past me as if I were a piece of furniture that clashed with the Dacre. I had spent the last 5 years watching Jessica drift away from me, not all at once, but in inches, trading the values I raised her with hard work, humility, loyalty for the shiny, hollow promises of Julian's social circle, where your worth was determined by your zip code and the label on your jacket. I had stayed quiet, biting my tongue when Julian made jokes about blue-collar mentalities at Thanksgiving, or when Jessica stopped calling me dad in public and started introducing me as my father, a subtle shift in language that felt like a wall being built brick by brick between us. If you've ever felt your own child slowly becoming a stranger to you, someone whose face you know but whose heart has become a foreign country, tell me in the comments, because that isolation is a coldness that settles in your bones and never really leaves. That evening, I was clutching a worn leather envelope inside my jacket pocket, pressing it against my chest like a shield, terrified and excited all at once, because inside that envelope was the culmination of 40 years of sweat, skipped meals, and overtime shifts. It was the deed to a stunning four-bedroom colonial on the edge of the very neighborhood Jessica had been weeping about not being able to afford, a house I had bought outright 3 weeks ago using the life savings I had hidden away. A secret fortune amassed not through luck but through the kind of grueling, silent discipline my generation understood. I had planned to give it to them at the wedding reception, a surprise that I hoped would finally prove to Julian that I wasn't just the quaint old man he tolerated, but a father who could provide, a father who mattered. I was fantasizing about the look on Jessica's face, the tears, the hug I hadn't received in years, when Julian's mother, a woman named Alina who looked at me like I was a stain on her Persian rug, drifted over with a glass of champagne in her hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Arthur, she said, her voice dripping with that faux politeness that is sharper than any insult, you must be so overwhelmed by all this. It's quite a step up from what you're used to, isn't it? I tightened my grip on my glass of water. I didn't drink, couldn't afford to if I wanted to keep saving, and forced a smile. I'm just happy for the kids, Alina, I said, my voice rasping slightly from disuse because I had barely spoken to anyone all night. She hummed, looking me up and down, her gaze lingering on my scuffed shoes. Yes, well, we all want the best for them. Julian has such a specific vision for the wedding photos. He's very aesthetic focused. You understand, don't you? She let the question hang there, pregnant with meaning, and before I could decipher exactly what she was insinuating, I saw Jessica and Julian walking toward us, and my heart sank because Jessica wasn't smiling. She looked pale, anxious, twisting her engagement ring, a rock the size of a grape that Julian's parents had paid for, and refusing to meet my eyes. Julian, however, looked perfectly calm, smoothing his silk tie as he stopped in front of me, blocking the light from the chandelier so I was cast in his shadow. Arthur, Julian began, using my first name as he always did, devoid of any honorific. We need to have a quick chat, just a bit of housekeeping before the big day tomorrow. I stood up, my knees popping, trying to meet him eye-wide, though he was taller and stood with the posture of a man who has never had to carry a heavy load. Of course, I said, looking at Jessica. Everything okay, sweetheart? She flinched at the pet name, finally looking at me with eyes that were glassy and filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. Dad, she started, her voice shaking, we've been talking with the wedding planner and Julian's family. It's about the flow of the ceremony, Julian interrupted, stepping in to control the narrative as he always did. You see, Arthur, this wedding is going to be featured in Society and Style magazine. It's a huge opportunity for my firm and for Jessica's social standing. Every detail has to be curated, flawless. I nodded slowly, the envelope in my pocket feeling suddenly heavy, hot against my ribs. I understand, I said. I won't get in the way. I'll just sit in the front row and, well, that's actually what we need to discuss, Julian said, exchanging a look with Alina, who was watching the interaction with the satisfaction of a predator watching a trap snap shut. Aesthetic is strictly black tie, designer, very high gloss. And frankly, Arthur, we're worried that, how do I put this gently, that your presence might be a bit jarring. The air left the room. The sounds of the party, the jazz band, the laughter, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. Jarring, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. I'm the father of the bride. We know, Dad, Jessica whispered, reaching out a hand but stopping inches from my sleeve as if afraid she might catch my poverty like a disease. But Julian thinks we think that maybe it would be less stressful for you if you didn't have the pressure of walking me down the aisle or being in the formal photos. I felt a physical blow to my chest, harder than any engine block that had ever slipped and hit me in the shop. They weren't just asking me to step back, they were erasing me. You don't want me to walk you? I asked, my voice barely audible. Jessica, I've dreamed of that walk since the day you were born. I taught you to walk. I held your hands when you took your first steps in our little kitchen on Elm Street. That's ancient history, Arthur, Julian sighed, checking his Rolex as if my heartbreak were taking up too much of his valuable schedule. Look, let's be real, you don't fit the image. That suit as well, it's tragic. Your truck out front is an eyesore, and we can't have the guests whispering about Jessica's background when we're trying to solidify her future. We're doing this for her. Don't you want to protect her? The manipulation was masterful, using my love for her as a weapon against me. If you're watching this and you've ever had your love weaponized by someone who doesn't understand the meaning of the word, hit that subscribe button because you know exactly how paralyzing that confusion is. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to defend me, to tell Julian that I was the man who worked 3 jobs to put her through college, who sat up with her when she was sick, who made her peanut butter sandwiches every day for 12 years. But she didn't. She looked down at her polished nails and whispered, "Maybe it's better, Dad. You know you're not comfortable around these people. You always say you hate fancy events. We're just uninviting you from the ceremony part. You can come to the reception later, maybe after the photos are done. Use the side entrance so the photographers don't get confused." Uninvited. The word hung in the air, absolute and cruel. I was being relegated to a shameful secret, allowed to sneak in the back door like a servant after the important people had been documented. I looked at Julian, seeing the smirk he was trying to hide, and then at Alina, who was openly smiling now, and finally at Jessica, the little girl I had carried on my shoulders, who was now standing there letting me be discarded because I didn't match the curtains. A strange calm settled over me, the kind of calm that comes when the worst thing you can imagine has finally happened and you realize you are still standing. I reached into my pocket and touched the leather envelope again. The deed to the house. The house on Willow Creek Lane with the big oak tree she had pointed out months ago, saying it was her dream home that they would never be able to afford because Julian's assets were tied up in investments. I had bought it. I had the keys in my other pocket. I had planned to hand it over during my toast, a toast I would never get to give now. I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "So," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I'm not welcome at my daughter's wedding because I'm too poor, is that it?" "Don't be dramatic," Julian scoffed. "It's not about poor, it's about branding, it's about the future. You're the past, Arthur, and let's be honest, you haven't exactly contributed anything to this wedding financially, have you? My parents paid for the venue, the dress, the catering. You've contributed nothing, so you don't really get a vote." The lie burned. I hadn't contributed because I was buying them a house. A massive, debt-free start to their life, but he didn't know that. And in that moment, standing there in my fraying suit with my heart breaking in my chest, I realized he didn't deserve to know, not yet. "I see," I said softly. "You're right, Julian, I haven't written a check for the flowers. I've been saving my money for something else." He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Saving? What for? A new muffler for that truck, please." I took a step back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm that had just opened up. "If that's what you want, Jessica," I said, looking only at her. "If you want me to leave, I'll leave, but I want you to say it. Look at me and say that a magazine photo is more important than your father." She looked up, tears finally spilling over, but she wiped them away quickly, glancing at Julian's stern face. "Please, Dad," she whispered. "Don't make a scene, just go, it's for the best." It was the betrayal that broke the final thread. I nodded, buttoned my jacket, and patted the pocket where the deed lay hidden. "Okay," I said, "I'll go. I won't embarrass you tomorrow." I turned to walk away, and Julian called out after me, "Hey, Arthur, make sure you move your truck off the main driveway on your way out. The valet is setting up." I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, past the tables set with silver I couldn't afford, past the flowers that cost more than my monthly rent, and out into the cool night air. I sat in my truck, a 2004 Ford that ran like a dream despite the rust, and just stared at the steering wheel for a long time. I could have driven away. I could have gone home, cried into my pillow, and accepted my fate as the discarded old man. But then my hand brushed against the leather envelope in my pocket. The deed, the house. The gift, and a fire started in my belly, a cold, hard fire that wasn't about anger, it was about justice. They thought I was worthless because they couldn't see my value. They thought I was poor because I didn't flash my money. They had judged me, sentenced me, and executed me without knowing the evidence I was holding. I looked back at the glowing windows of the country club where my daughter was likely being comforted by Julian, told that she had done the hard but right thing. I started the engine, the rumble familiar and grounding. I wasn't going to disappear, oh no, I was going to give them a wedding gift they would never forget, but I wasn't going to do it on their timeline. I was going to do it on mine. And trust me, if you think uninviting your own father is cold, wait until you see what happens when that father decides to stop being the victim and starts being the lesson. I pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, and instead of turning left toward my small apartment, I turned right toward the house on Willow Creek Lane. I had some work to do before the ceremony I wasn't invited to, because if I wasn't going to be the father of the bride, I was going to be something else entirely, the man who owned their future. I stood in the center of the living room of the house on Willow Creek Lane, the silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine of my truck parked in the driveway outside. And as I looked around at the pristine oak floors I had paid to have refinished, and the massive bay windows I had imagined Jessica sitting in on Christmas mornings. I felt a kind of sickness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the realization that I had spent my entire life building a castle for a princess who was ashamed of the mason who laid the bricks. The moonlight was streaming in through the uncurtained windows, casting long, pale rectangles on the floor, and I clutched that leather envelope so hard my knuckles turned white, tracing the embossed edges of the deed that represented 40 years of skipped vacations, brown-bagged lunches, and fixing radiators in freezing garages until my fingers were too stiff to uncurl. I walked into the kitchen, a space I had specifically chosen because it had a massive island where I thought Jessica could bake cookies with her future children, the way she used to bake with her mother before the cancer took her. And I remembered the day I signed the papers, the realtor looking at my greasy work boots and asking if I needed to speak to a loan officer, and the quiet pride I felt when I pulled out the cashier's check for the full amount, thinking to myself that this was it. This was the moment I leveled the playing field for my little girl, ensuring she would never have to worry about a mortgage the way I had. But standing there now in the dark, uninvited and discarded, the house didn't feel like a gift anymore. It felt like a mausoleum for a love that was apparently one-sided. I took the deed out of the envelope, the paper crisp and heavy, and I almost, just for a second, thought about leaving it on the counter with a note, walking away and letting them have it anyway because a father's instinct to provide is a curse that doesn't just switch off when his heart is broken. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket, the harsh vibration shattering the moment, and I pulled it out to see a text from Jessica. I stared at the glowing screen, hoping for an apology, hoping she had come to her senses and told Julian to go to hell, but the words I read froze the blood in my veins. Dad, Julian and his mom think it's best if you don't come to the reception until after the speeches and the first dance are over. We don't want things to be awkward during the filming. Please just come for cake around 9 p.m. Use the service entrance so you don't cross the videographers. Love you. The love you at the end was the cruelest part, a tacked-on afterthought meant to soften a blow that was designed to decapitate my dignity. They didn't just want me out of the ceremony. They wanted me hidden away like a dirty secret until the important part of the evening, the part where they projected their perfect image to the world, was safely concluded. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking not with sadness anymore, but with a cold, clarifying rage. If you've ever had someone you would die for tell you that you aren't worth being seen with, tell me honestly in the comments, would you have folded or would you have done what I did next? I didn't leave the deed on the counter. I slid it back into the leather envelope, placed it inside my jacket pocket right next to my heart, and walked out of that beautiful empty house, locking the door with a click that sounded like the closing of a casket. I wasn't going to go home. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to see this through, but I needed to see it with my own eyes to believe that the daughter I raised had truly become this unrecognizable creature. I drove to the church the next morning, not the designated guest parking lot where the valets were parking Bentleys and Mercedes, but a public lot 3 blocks away, and I walked the rest of the distance in the drizzling rain, my old umbrella shielding my face, stopping at the edge of the churchyard where I could see the guests arriving without being seen myself. I stood behind an old oak tree, watching the parade of wealth and pretension, seeing Julian's friends arrive in designer suits that cost more than my car, seeing Alina preening like a peacock in a feathered hat, and then I saw Jessica. She arrived in a vintage Rolls-Royce, looking like an angel in that white dress, but when she stepped out she didn't look happy, she looked managed, her eyes darting around nervously as Julian's mother adjusted her veil not with affection but with the critical eye of a stage manager fixing a prop. I watched my daughter walk up the steps of the church alone. There was no father to take her arm, no one to whisper "I'm proud of you" before the doors opened. She walked alone because her husband-to-be preferred the aesthetic of solitude over the reality of her father's poverty. It broke me watching that. I wanted to run across the lawn, grab her hand, and tell her she didn't have to do this, that she didn't have to marry a man who treated her family like a branding issue. But I stayed rooted to the spot, the rain soaking into my shoes, because I knew that if I caused a scene now I would only prove Julian right, that I was the chaotic, unrefined element they needed to excise. So I waited. I waited until the doors closed, until the muffled sound of the organ started, and I stood in the rain for the entire hour, imagining the vows they were exchanging, wondering if Jessica felt a phantom weight on her arm where I should have been. When the doors opened again and they spilled out as husband and wife, the applause was polite, restrained, perfect for the cameras that were clicking furiously, but I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Julian wasn't looking at Jessica. He was looking at the photographers, angling his chin, checking his reflection in the window of the car, performing happiness rather than feeling it. I turned away before they could spot me, walking back to my truck with a heavy, trudging step, the dampness seeping into my bones. I had hours to kill before I was allowed to show up at the reception, so I sat in a diner on the outskirts of town, nursing a black coffee and staring at the leather envelope on the table. The waitress, a kind woman named Brenda who had served me for years, topped up my mug and asked, "Aren't you supposed to be at a wedding today, Arthur? You're all dressed up." I looked at her, at the genuine warmth in her eyes, and felt a lump in my throat. "I'm on the late shift, Brenda," I lied, unable to voice the shame. "Just waiting for my cue." She smiled and walked away, and I realized that this waitress showed me more respect in 5 seconds than my new son-in-law had in 5 years. Time dragged, agonizing and slow, until the clock hit 8:30 p.m. I paid my bills, straightened my tie in the reflection of the napkin dispenser, and drove to the country club. Parking lot was full now, the windows of the ballroom glowing with golden light, music thumping faintly through the walls. I remembered the instructions: service entrance, side door. I walked past the red carpet at the front, past the valet who looked at me with suspicion, and navigated around the building to the back, past the dumpsters that smelled of seafood and champagne, to a heavy metal door propped open with a crate. A security guard was standing there, a massive guy with a clipboard, smoking a cigarette. Staff check-in was at 4, he grunted, blocking my path. You're late, Pops. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a humiliation so sharp it nearly cut my breath. I'm not staff, I said, my voice tight. I'm the father of the bride. He looked me up and down, taking in the wet hem of my trousers and the fraying cuffs of my jacket, and snorted. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. Look, buddy, I don't have you on the guest list. Guest list is closed, no entry. Check again, I said, stepping closer, my hand instinctively going to the pocket with the deed, drawing strength from it. Arthur Miller, Jessica's father. He flipped a page on his clipboard board and then paused. Oh, Miller, yeah, I got a note here. Late arrival, backdoor entry only, no escort needed. All right, go on in, but stay out of the main foyer. They're doing some video shoot and don't want the background cluttered. Cluttered, I was human clutter. I squeezed past him into the kitchen, the heat hitting me instantly, chefs shouting orders, waiters rushing past with trays of filet mignon that I knew cost $80 a plate. I was dodging busboys and ducking under trays, navigating the bowels of the venue just to see my daughter on her wedding day. I finally found a door that led to the main ballroom and cracked it open just a sliver, slipping into the shadows of the room's periphery, behind a massive floral arrangement that smelled cloyingly sweet. The room was dazzling, I'll admit, crystal chandeliers, silk tablecloths, a live band playing Sinatra, but the atmosphere was cold. People were clustered in tight circles, sipping drinks and eyeing each other's jewelry. I scanned the room for Jessica and found her at the head table, but she wasn't eating. She was listening to Julian, who was leaning close, whispering something that made her look anxious. I moved closer, sticking to the darkened edges of the room, invisible to the dazzling crowd, a ghost in my own life. I wanted to just see her smile just once, to justify the sacrifice of the house, to tell myself that despite everything she was happy. But as I edged closer to the head table, shielded by a pillar, I overheard a conversation that stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't Jessica and Julian speaking, it was Julian and his mother, Alina. They had stepped away from the table just a few feet from where I was hiding, presumably to have a private moment away from the cameras. Did you see the check from the Mortons? Alina hissed, her voice low and urgent. Only 500 cheapskates, Julian sighed, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. It's not enough, Mother. The venue cost double the estimate and the photographer just hit us with an overtime fee. We're underwater. Jessica's father had actually kicked in like a normal parent. We wouldn't be sweating right now. Well, we knew he was a dead end, Alina spat, taking a sip of her wine. The man is a mechanic, Julian. He probably has his money buried in coffee cans in the backyard. It's embarrassing. Thank God we kept him out of the photos. Can you imagine that suit next to your Armani? It would have tanked the magazine spread. I know, Julian said, and then he laughed, a cold, cruel sound. But don't worry. Once the magazine feature comes out, my client list will double. We just need to ride out the debt for a few months. And hey, maybe the old man will kick the bucket soon and leave Jessica that rusty truck. We can scrap it for a few $100. They laughed, both of them. They laughed at my death. They laughed at the idea of scrapping my truck, the truck I used to drive Jessica to school in, the truck I used to earn the money that paid for her braces. I stood there in the shadows, my hand clutching the deed so hard the envelope crinkled loudly, but the music covered the sound. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just snobs, they were broke, they were frauds. All this glitz, all this glamour, the $10,000 dress, the champagne tower, it was all a lie. They were drowning in debt, desperate for appearances, and they despised me not just because I was poor, but because I was the only thing in the room that was real. They were banking on a magazine spread to save them from financial ruin, while mocking the man who had a $500,000 property sitting in his breast pocket. I felt a shift inside me, a tectonic plate moving from sadness to absolute, icy resolve. I looked at the deed in my mind's eye, the 4 bedrooms, the garden, the stability, the future. They didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve a single shingle of that roof. But more than that, I realized that giving them the house now wouldn't just be a waste. It would be a crime against my own dignity. If you've ever realized that the people you are trying to impress are actually less successful and more desperate than you are, hit that like button, because the power shift that happens in that moment is intoxicating. I watched Julian walk back to the table and kiss Jessica on the cheek, not a kiss of love, but a kiss of possession, a performance for the room. And I knew then that I couldn't just leave. Leaving was what the old Arthur would have done. Leaving was passive. No, I had to stay. I had to wait for the right moment. I had to let them think they had won, that they had successfully erased me, before I reminded them that you can't erase the foundation without bringing down the whole house. I checked my watch, 9:00 p.m., the time I was allowed to eat cake. I stepped out from behind the pillar, smoothing my fraying jacket, and began to walk not toward the side door but straight toward the head table. I wasn't going to sneak anymore. I was going to walk through the middle of their perfect, debt-ridden fantasy, and I was going to hand them a gift, all right, but it wasn't going to be the gift they expected. As I crossed the dance floor, heads started to turn. The whispers began, a ripple of confusion spreading through the room as the man in the charcoal suit with the shiny elbows marched toward the groom who had just wished him dead. I locked eyes with Julian. His smile faltered. His face went pale. He stood up, looking like he was about to call security, but it was too late. I was there, and I had the microphone in my sights. Part 3 is going to get ugly, I muttered to myself, and I stepped into the light. The silence that fell over that ballroom as I stepped onto the dance floor was not the respectful hush reserved for a beloved patriarch, but the terrified, suffocating vacuum that occurs when a bomb has been spotted in a crowded room. And I was the bomb, ticking away in my charcoal suit with the frayed cuffs, clutching the microphone that I had gently taken from the trembling hand of the lead singer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth than witnessing a family implosion. I stood there, the lights blinding me, feeling the heat of 300 pairs of eyes burning into my skin, but the only eyes I cared about were the three sets staring back at me from the head table. Jessica, who looked like she was about to faint, her face draining of color until it matched her dress. Alina, whose lip was curled in a snarl of pure social panic. And Julian, who had risen half out of his chair, his knuckles white against the tablecloth, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and the desperate calculation of a man wondering if he could tackle an old man without ruining his Italian suit. I cleared my throat, the sound booming through the speakers and causing a feedback whine that made half the guests wince, and I saw Julian mouth the word "sit down" to me, a command given with the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world, but I just smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't reach my eyes because I knew something he didn't. I knew that the world he thought he owned was built on a foundation of sand, and I was the tide coming in. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady, sounding deeper and more resonant than I remembered, grounded by decades of shouting over engines and negotiating with parts suppliers. "For those of you who don't know me and looking around this room, I suspect that's most of you. I'm Arthur, Jessica's father." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd like wind through dry wheat. "That's the father. Why is he dressed like that? I thought he was dead." I ignored them, locking eyes with my daughter. "I wasn't supposed to speak tonight," I continued, letting the words hang there, heavy with implication. "In fact, I wasn't supposed to be here at all until the cameras were turned off. My son-in-law felt that my presence might distract from the aesthetic of the evening." I saw Julian flinch as if I'd slapped him, and Alina hissed something into his ear, her hand clawing at his arm. "But I couldn't let my little girl get married without giving her a gift," I said, and slowly, deliberately, I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out the leather envelope. It was old, worn, smelling faintly of the tobacco I used to smoke 20 years ago in the cedar chest where I kept my valuables, and against the pristine white linen and sparkling crystal of the room, it looked like an artifact from another world. I saw the change happen instantly. It was chemical, primal. The moment Julian saw the envelope, the moment he realized I was holding something that looked like it contained documents, or perhaps a check, his posture shifted. The aggression melted into a sharp, predatory greed. He sat back down slowly, his eyes locked on that leather pouch like a starving dog eyeing a bone. I watched Alina lean forward, her nostrils actually flaring, and even Jessica looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes, hope that maybe, just maybe, her embarrassing father had come through with money to save them from the hole they had dug. If you have ever seen someone's face transform from hatred to hunger the moment they think you have something they want, tell me in the comments, because it is the most disgusting magic trick human beings are capable of performing. I held the envelope up, letting the light catch the worn edges. "I have worked every day of my life since I was 15 years old," I said, my voice dropping to a register that forced them to lean in. "I have saved, I have sacrificed, I have gone without so that my daughter would never have to, and inside this envelope is the culmination of that life. It is a key to a future free of worry, a foundation." The room was dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the untouched drinks. Julian was practically licking his lips. He thought it was a check. He thought I had sold the shop or maybe cashed in a pension he didn't know about. He was already spending the money in his head, paying off the caterers, the photographers, the debt he was drowning in. I took a step toward the table, extending the envelope, and I saw Julian's hand twitch, ready to snatch it. And in that split second, I saw the truth of him so clearly it was blinding. He didn't love Jessica. He didn't even respect her. He looked at me, the man he had called useless and tragic an hour ago, and he was willing to smile now because he thought I was paying for his lifestyle. It was repulsing. I stopped 3 feet from the table. I looked at Jessica, searching for any sign of the girl who used to sit on the garage floor handing me wrenches, the girl who cried when we found a stray cat. But all I saw was a woman terrified of her husband's disapproval, a woman who had let them erase me. I couldn't give it to them, not yet, not like this. Giving them the deed now would be like throwing pearls before swine. They would swallow it whole and still trample me in the mud. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the depth of the rot before I performed the surgery. So with a movement that shocked even me, I pulled the envelope back. I tucked it safely inside my jacket, buttoning it tight. "But," I said, watching Julian's face crumble into confusion and then rage, "a gift of this magnitude requires the right moment, and looking at this performance tonight, I don't think this is the moment." I turned to the microphone one last time. "I'll hold on to this for now, enjoy the cake," and I walked away. The sound of the microphone thumping onto the stand was the period at the end of the sentence. I didn't look back as I walked off the dance floor, but I could hear the explosion of whispers behind me, the frantic scraping of chairs as Julian jumped up. I didn't head for the exit, though. I headed for the bar, tucking myself into a dark alcove near the service entrance, ordering a club soda and waiting. I knew he would come. And sure enough, 2 minutes later, Julian stormed into the hallway, his face a mask of red fury, Alina trailing behind him like a poisonous vapor. They didn't see me in the shadows, they were too busy panicking. What the hell was that? Julian hissed, slamming his hand against the wall. What is in that envelope? Did you see the size of it? That was a checkbook or bonds or God, what if it was the deed to his shop? That land has to be worth something. He's playing games, Eleanor spat, her voice shaking. The little peasant is playing games with us, he knows we're vulnerable. Julian, if we don't pay the venue manager by midnight, they're going to cut the power. They told me explicitly, the check bounced, we need that money. I froze, my glass halfway to my mouth. The check bounced. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just in debt, they were insolvent. They were literally hours away from being kicked out of their own wedding reception. I know, mother, I know, Julian shouted, keeping his voice a harsh whisper. Why do you think I let him stay? I thought he was going to hand over a check. We could have cashed it via mobile app right there and wired the funds to the venue. Now what? He's holding out. He's probably waiting for an apology or some sentimental garbage. Then give it to him, Eleanor snapped. Go find him, cry if you have to, tell him he's the patriarch, stroke his ego, get that envelope, Julian, our reputation is on the line. If the lights go out, the magazine pulls the story. If the magazine pulls the story, the investors for your firm pull out. We lose everything, do you understand? Everything. I stood in the shadows, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a lifeline. They were using my daughter's marriage as a fraudulent fundraising gala to save their failing business empire. And Jessica, did she know? Was she part of the con or was she another victim? I needed to find out. I watched them storm off toward the main lobby, presumably to hunt me down, and I slipped in the opposite direction, toward the kitchen and the vendor staging area. I needed to talk to the people who were actually working, the people who see everything. I found the wedding planner, a harried woman with a headset and a clipboard, arguing with the head caterer near the walk-in fridge. Her name tag said Sarah, and she looked like she was about to cry. I can't serve the main course if I don't get the second half of the deposit, Sarah, the caterer was saying, crossing his arms. I've got strict orders, no cash, no filet. I'm working on it, Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking. The groom said there was a transfer issue, he's sorting it out right now. Please, Tony, just send out the salads, buy me 20 minutes. I stepped forward, emerging from the rack of waiter uniforms. He's not sorting it out, I said quietly. Both of them jumped. Sarah looked at me, recognizing the suit from the dance floor. You're the father, she said, her eyes narrowing. Please tell me you're here to settle the bill because otherwise I'm about to have a heart attack. I'm not here to settle his debts, I said, leaning against a stainless steel counter. But I might be able to help you avoid a disaster. Tell me the truth, how bad is it? Sarah looked at Tony, then at me, and the professional mask slipped. She slumped against the wall. It's bad, Mr. Miller. They haven't paid the florist, the band is playing on a promise, and the venue fee was paid with a credit card that was reported stolen by Julian's father this morning. Apparently there's a family dispute about who authorized the charge. This whole wedding is a house of cards. If they don't come up with $50,000 in the next hour, the police are going to be called. That's why they're obsessed with the magazine. They signed a contract. If the photos get published, they get a sponsorship fee that covers the debt. But they need the wedding to finish to get the photos. I felt a cold chill settle in my stomach. It was a Ponzi scheme. My daughter's happiness was just collateral for a business deal. And Jessica, I asked, my voice rasping. Does she know? Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. I don't think so. She's been asking why the schedule is delayed, why the staff looks stressed. Julian keeps telling her it's just logistics. She thinks she's marrying a prince, Mr. Miller. She has no idea she's marrying a pauper in a Gucci belt. That was the turning point. That was the moment the last shred of doubt left my mind. Jessica wasn't the villain, she was the mark. She had been seduced by the lifestyle, yes, and she had treated me poorly, yes, but she was being manipulated by professional grifters. And I was the only one who could save her, not by giving them the money, but by exposing the lie. But I needed to do it in a way that couldn't be spun. I couldn't just tell her, she wouldn't believe me. She was too under his spell. I needed to show her. I needed Julian to show her himself. Tony, I said, turning to the caterer, send out the salads. I'll make sure you get paid. You have my word as a man who has lived in this town for 40 years. Tony looked at me, looked at the fraying cuffs of my suit, and then looked at my eyes. He saw something there that money can't buy, integrity. He nodded. Okay, Arthur, salads go. But if I don't see cash by the cake cutting, I'm taking the steaks back to the truck. Deal, I said. I walked out of the kitchen, my mind racing. I had bought them time. Now I needed to set the trap. I knew Julian would come for me again. He was desperate. I needed to position myself where the confrontation would be inevitable, but private enough that he would show his true colors, yet public enough that the right person could hear. I made my way to the bridal suite. It was a risky move. Bride was supposed to be at the head table, but I knew Jessica. When she was stressed, she hid. And the reception was dragging, the tension was high. She would retreat to the suite to fix her makeup and breathe. I slipped into the small hallway leading to the suite and waited in the alcove where the cleaning supplies were kept. The door cracked just an inch. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, Jessica came down the hall, her head down, wiping a tear from her cheek. She went into the suite. I didn't follow her. I waited. Because I knew who would be right behind her. Julian came around the corner not a minute later, his phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what you have to do, mother, he was whispering furiously. Find the old man, pick his pockets if you have to. He's got something in that jacket. I saw the embossed stamp on the envelope. It looked like a property deed. If he deeded us that junkyard of a shop, we can leverage it for a loan tonight. Just find him. He hung up and barged into the bridal suite without knocking. I moved silently from my hiding spot and stood right outside the door. It was thin wood. I could hear everything. Julian, Jessica's voice was trembling. Where have you been? The guests are wondering why we aren't mingling. And why are the waiters whispering? Is something wrong? Everything is fine, Jessica, stop whining, Julian snapped. The cruelty in his voice was undisguised now. The mask was slipping because the pressure was too high. I need you to tell me where your father went. Did he say anything to you? Did he hand you anything? No, she sniffled. He just gave that weird speech and left. Julian, why are you so obsessed with him? You told me to uninvite him. You told me he was an embarrassment. Now you're chasing him. Because he has something I need, Julian yelled. Look, Jessica, we have a cash flow problem, a small one, and your father, the embarrassment, was waving around an envelope that looked very expensive. If he's holding out on us, I need to know, did he ever mention a savings account, an inheritance, anything? I don't know, she stammered. He's a mechanic, Julian. He lives in a one-bedroom apartment. He doesn't have money. Why are you acting like this? You're scaring me. I'm acting like a man who is trying to save your wedding, Julian screamed. Do you think this pays for itself? Do you think you pay for it? You bring nothing to the table, Jessica. No money, no connections, just a deadbeat dad in a cheap suit. I'm doing everything. I heard the sound of sobbing. My hand gripped the doorknob, ready to tear it open and end him right there, but I stopped myself. Pause for a second and ask yourself, would you have burst in to save her, or would you have let her hear the full truth, no matter how much it hurt? I knew that if I went in now, he would spin it. He would say he was stressed, that he didn't mean it. She would forgive him because she wanted to believe the fairy tale. No, she needed to see the monster without the mask. I needed him to say it all. I took my hand off the doorknob and stepped back into the shadows as the door opened. Julian stormed out, leaving Jessica crying inside. He didn't see me. He marched down the hall back toward the party. I waited a beat, then stepped into the doorway of the suite. Jessica was sitting at the vanity, her face buried in her hands. She looked up in the mirror and saw me. Dad, she whispered, her makeup streaked with tears. I didn't go to her. I didn't hug her. I stood in the doorway, the leather envelope heavy in my pocket. He's in trouble, Jess, I said softly. Money trouble. He thinks I have the solution in my pocket, and he's right. She stared at me, confusion warring with heartbreak. What do you mean? I mean, I said, walking into the room and closing the door behind me, that I bought you a house. A house paid for in cash. The deed is right here. I pulled out the envelope. Her eyes went wide. But I'm not giving it to him, and I'm not giving it to you if you stay with him. Dad, you can't. We're married, she whispered. It's done. It's a piece of paper, I said sternly, just like this deed, and papers can be torn up. I walked over to the vanity and placed the envelope on the table between us. He's going to come for this. He's going to corner me. And when he does, I'm going to reveal exactly who he is to the entire room. And you need to decide right now whose daughter you are. Are you the daughter of a man who builds things with his hands and values truth, or are you the wife of a fraud who values an image? She looked at the envelope, then at me. He said I bring nothing to the table, she choked out. He said I'm nothing. He's wrong, I said, placing my hand over hers. You are everything, but only if you walk away from the lie. I picked up the envelope again. I'm going back out there. It's almost time for the speeches. He's going to try to take this from me. Stay here, fix your face, and when you hear my voice, you come out and you make your choice. I turned and left her there, staring at her reflection. I walked back toward the ballroom, the adrenaline pumping through my veins like ice water. I knew what I had to do. I had the deed, I had the truth, and now I had the stage. I walked straight to the DJ booth where the terrified MC was trying to keep the energy up. I need the mic again, I said. The MC looked at Julian across the room, who was frantically signaling no, but I grabbed the mic stand anyway. Julian saw me. He started running. Alina started running. They were coming for me like wolves, but they were too late. I wasn't just going to give a toast. I was going to burn the house down, and as Julian lunged for the stage, I smiled. If this moment shocked you, I thought to the audience watching my life unfold, hit subscribe because the ending is even stronger. I raised the microphone. Security, Julian screamed. Stop him, he's drunk. I'm not drunk, I boomed over the speakers, my voice stopping the security guards in their tracks. I'm just a father with a wedding gift. I held the envelope high. The room froze. Julian froze at the edge of the dance floor, panting, eyes wild. You want this, Julian? I asked, my voice calm, dangerous. You want what's inside here? Give it to me, Arthur, he snarled, dropping the pretense. It belongs to us, does it? I asked. Let's see. And with 300 people watching, I reached into the envelope, but I didn't pull out the deed. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper, the receipt from the wedding planner that I had swiped from Sarah's clipboard when she wasn't looking. The receipt stamped declined. I think we need to talk about who paid for this party, I said, and the look on Julian's face told me that the war had just begun. The piece of paper fluttered in my hand like a white flag of surrender, but it wasn't my surrender, it was theirs. And as I read the words printed in stark red ink across the top of the invoice, transaction declined, insufficient funds, I felt the entire energy of the room shift from confusion to a sharp, collective gasp that sucked the oxygen right out of the ballroom. Julian stopped dead in his tracks, his hand halfway reaching for the microphone, his face freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror because he realized in that split second that I wasn't just an embarrassing old man making a drunken toast, I was the executioner standing at the switch of his social life. What is this? I asked, my voice booming through the speakers, cutting through the murmurs of the 300 guests who were now staring at the groom with newfound suspicion. It looks like a bill, Julian. A bill for $50,000 for this venue, this food, this champagne tower, a bill that your credit card couldn't cover, a bill that the wedding planner tells me is currently standing between these guests and the main course. Alina let out a shriek that sounded like a wounded bird. Turn off the microphone, he's senile, he's having an episode, security, get him off the stage. She lunged toward the DJ booth, clawing at the soundboard, but the DJ, a young kid who clearly hadn't been paid either, stepped back and let the feed run, crossing his arms with a smirk. I didn't budge. I looked straight at the crowd, seeing the faces of Julian's business partners, his college friends, the investors he was trying to impress. My son-in-law, I continued, pointing a finger at the man who was now sweating so profusely his bronzer was running down his collar, told me earlier tonight that I didn't fit the aesthetic of this wedding. He told me I was too poor to be in the photos. He uninvited me from walking my own daughter down the aisle because this suit right here wasn't designer. I brushed the lapel of my jacket. But here's the irony, folks. This suit is paid for. My truck outside paid for. My life paid for. But this, I waved the declined receipt. This is a fantasy, a fraud. You are all sitting in a room rented on a maxed-out credit card by a man who is banking on your approval to pay his debts. Julian finally snapped. He roared, a guttural sound of rage, and lunged at me, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. You shut up, you jealous, bitter old failure. Give me that envelope. I know you have money in there. Give it to me. We grappled on the edge of the stage, the microphone stand clattering to the floor with a deafening thud, and the crowd screamed. He was younger, stronger, fueled by the adrenaline of a dying animal, but I had 40 years of manual labor in my grip. I shoved him back hard and he stumbled, tripping over the train of a bridesmaid's dress and falling onto his backside in the center of the dance floor. He looked pathetic, sprawling there in his ruined tuxedo, panting, his eyes wild. You want the envelope? I shouted, my voice raw, projecting without the mic now. You want to see what a useless mechanic saved for his daughter? I reached into my pocket again. The room went silent. Even Alina stopped screaming. I pulled out the leather pouch. I undid the clasp with trembling fingers, and I pulled out the deed. I unfolded the thick legal document, holding it up so the chandelier light caught the official seal of the county clerk. This, I announced, is the deed to a 4-bedroom colonial on Willow Creek Lane, 3 acres, hardwood floors, a nursery ready for a baby, fully paid for, no mortgage, no debt, cash. A collective gasp went through the room, louder this time. I heard someone whisper, my God, that house is worth $500,000. I looked down at Julian, who was staring at the paper as if it were the Holy Grail. I bought this 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I bought it for Jessica. I wanted her to have the security I never had starting out. I wanted her to be safe. Julian scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide and hungry, the humiliation forgotten in the face of salvation. See, he yelled to the crowd, pointing at the deed. See, he bought it for us. It's our house. It's an asset. We can leverage it. We can fix this. He turned to me, a sick, sycophantic smile stretching across his face. Arthur, Dad, thank you. I knew you would come through. Give it to me. We need to show the manager. We can put it up as collateral for the venue fee. Just hand it over. He reached out his hand, expecting me to fold, expecting the good father to sacrifice everything to save the family name. And in that moment, the temptation was there not to help him, but to stop the pain on Jessica's face wherever she was. But I knew that handing him this deed would be like handing a junkie a loaded needle. It wouldn't save him, it would only prolong the sickness. If you're watching this and screaming at the screen, don't give it to him. Smash that like button right now, because I need to know that there are people out there who understand that sometimes love means saying no. I looked at his hand, then at his face. Collateral, I repeated. You want to take the home I built for my daughter and pawn it to pay for a party, to pay for this? I gestured to the room. No, I pulled the deed back against my chest. This deed is in my name, Julian, and it stays in my name. His smile vanished. What, you said it was a gift? It was, I said, for my daughter, not for a corporation, and certainly not for a man who treats her father like trash until he needs a bailout. You can't do this, Alina shrieked, marching up to me, her face contorted. You are ruining this family. Think of the scandal. Think of Jessica. If we get kicked out of here, she will be the laughingstock of the state. Do you want that for her? Do you want her to be humiliated because you're too stubborn to help? I'm not the one humiliating her, Alina, I shot back. You are. You built this stage. I'm just turning on the lights. Just then, the double doors at the back of the room banged open. Security guards, real ones, not the venue staff, but uniformed officers walked in, flanked by the venue manager who looked furious. Mr. Ashton, the manager called out, pointing at Julian. We have a problem. The second card you provided just came back as reported stolen, and we have a police report filed by your father regarding unauthorized wire transfers. The room erupted, chaos, absolute chaos. Guests started grabbing their purses. The photographer lowered his camera, looking terrified. Julian looked around, trapped. No, it's a mistake, he yelled. My father-in-law has the money, he has a deed. It's worth $600,000, he's covering it. He pointed at me, trying to throw me to the wolves. The police officer looked at me. Sir, is this true? Are you covering the debt? I looked at the officer. I looked at the deed in my hand. I looked at the crowd of people who had judged me by my shoes. And then I looked at the side of the room where the bridal suite door had just opened. Jessica stood there. She had heard the screaming. She saw the police. She saw her husband pointing at me like I was an ATM, and she saw me holding the paper that represented her freedom. She walked into the room, her white dress trailing on the floor, moving through the chaos like a ghost. Jessica, Julian screamed. Tell him to give us the deed. We're going to be arrested. For God's sake, tell your father to do his job. She stopped in front of me. She looked at Julian, sweating, screaming, blaming. Then she looked at me, old, tired, but standing tall with the truth in my hand. She looked at the receipt on the floor, the proof of his lies, and then she looked at Alina, who was currently trying to hide her face from a guest's iPhone camera. Jessica, I whispered, it's your choice. The house is yours, but not with him, never with him. Julian grabbed her arm. Jessica, snap out of it. He's trying to manipulate you. He's jealous of us. Tell him to hand it over. Jessica looked down at Julian's hand on her arm, the grip tight, possessive, painful. She pulled her arm away, slowly, deliberately. He's not jealous, Julian, she said, her voice quiet but ringing through the silent zone around us. He's right. Julian recoiled as if she had stabbed him. What? He's right, she repeated, louder this time, turning to face him. You lied to me. You told me the wedding was paid for by your firm. You told me the house on Willow Creek was impossible because the market was bad, not because you were broke. You told me my father was a burden. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of clarity now. He's not a burden, he's the only honest man in this room. You stupid girl, Alina hissed. Don't you dare side with him. You'll be nothing without Julian, nothing. I'd rather be nothing than be a fraud, Jessica said. She turned to me and held out her hand. Dad, let's go. Julian laughed hysterically. You can't go, we're married, you're my wife. Actually, Jessica said, reaching up and unclasping the diamond necklace Alina had lent her, a necklace I now suspected was probably fake or stolen too. We haven't signed the license yet. The efficient is still waiting in the green room for his check. She dropped the necklace into Julian's palm. I don't think I'll be signing it. The sound of the necklace hitting his hand was the final bell. Julian stared at it, then at her, and then his face twisted into pure malice. Fine, he screamed. Go back to the gutter with your mechanic father. You deserve each other, but that house is marital property. I'll sue you for it. I'll take half. I'll take everything. It's not marital property if there's no marriage, I said calmly, stepping between him and my daughter. And it's not your property because the deed is in my name, Arthur Miller, sole owner. I turned to the police officer. Officer, this man is trying to claim assets that do not belong to him. I am leaving with my daughter. Unless I am under arrest for being solvent, I'd like to go. The officer looked at Julian, who was foaming at the mouth, and then at me. He stepped aside. You're free to go, sir. Mr. Ashton, however, we need to have a conversation about this wire fraud. The reality crashed down on Julian. The police were moving in. The venue manager was blocking the exit. The guests were filming. And I was walking away. I took Jessica's hand, the hand I used to hold when she was a toddler crossing the street, and I placed it on my arm. She gripped my jacket, the cheap fabric she had been ashamed of, and buried her face in my shoulder as we walked. We walked past the head table, past the cake that would never be cut, past the friends who were already posting the video to TikTok. If you think this moment was satisfying, just wait, because the look on Alina's face as we passed her, the look of a woman realizing she had bet on the wrong horse and lost the entire stable, was worth every penny of that house. We reached the double doors. I pushed them open, and the cool night air hit us, smelling of rain and freedom. We walked to the parking lot, past the Rolls-Royce with the just married sign that now looked like a bad joke. We walked to my truck, my rusty 2004 Ford. I opened the door for her. She gathered her $10,000 dress, which I knew now was probably rented or stolen, and climbed onto the cracked leather seat. I got in the driver's side and started the engine. It roared to life, a sound I loved. I looked back at the country club one last time. I could see the blue lights of the police cruisers flashing against the ballroom windows. The party was over. But as I looked at my daughter, who was wiping off her makeup with a napkin from the glove box and looking at me with a small, sad smile, I knew our life was just restarting. Dad, she whispered. Yes, sweetheart. Can we go see the house? I smiled, patting the pocket where the deed rested warm and safe. Yeah, we can go see the house. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving the wreckage of the Vanderbilts and the Ashtons in the rearview mirror, but the story didn't end there. Because while Julian went to jail that night, the real justice, the kind that hurts the most, came 6 months later. And trust me, you are going to want to hear how the mechanic from the wrong side of town ended up owning the very company that fired his son-in-law. Hit that subscribe button because the aftermath is where the real lesson lives. If this story gave you chills, comment Team Arthur below. We were driving home, but I knew the war wasn't over. Julian was the type to fight dirty, even from a cell. But he forgot one thing: I had the high ground now, and I wasn't coming down. The drive from the country club to Willow Creek Lane was less than 5 miles. But in the cab of my rusted 2004 Ford, with the heater rattling against the silence and my daughter sitting beside me in a ruined $10,000 wedding dress that seemed to swallow the passenger seat in waves of white tulle, it felt like we were crossing an ocean, leaving behind a continent of lies and navigating toward a shore I had only ever seen in my dreams. Jessica didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, her hands trembling as she wiped the last of the waterproof mascara from her cheeks with a grease-stained rag I kept in the glove box, a stark contrast that made my chest ache with a mixture of pity and relief, because for the first time in years she wasn't the polished, curated mannequin Julian had molded. She was just a girl, my girl, broken and breathing and real. When I finally turned the truck onto the gravel driveway of the property, the headlights cut through the darkness and illuminated the house in flashes, the white columns standing tall and proud, the sprawling porch waiting for rocking chairs, the massive oak tree in the front yard that had stood watch for 100 years and would now watch over us. And I heard Jessica's breath hitch in her throat, a sound that was half sob and half wonder. I put the truck in park and killed the engine, and the silence of the countryside rushed in to replace the mechanical hum, filled only with the chirping of crickets and the wind rustling the leaves, a peace so profound after the chaos of the ballroom that it felt holy. This is it, she whispered, her voice barely audible, staring up at the dark windows that reflected the moonlight. You really bought this for us. I looked at the house, the physical manifestation of every overtime shift, every skipped lunch, every moment of self-denial I had endured for 4 decades. I bought it for you, Jess, I said softly, gripping the steering wheel. I bought it so you would never have to pretend to be someone else to have a roof over your head. I bought it so you know that your value isn't in a bank account or a magazine spread, but in the fact that you are loved." She turned to me then, her eyes swollen and red, and the dam finally broke, not with the polite, pretty crying she had done at the venue, but with ugly heaving sobs of a woman realizing how close she had come to throwing her entire life into a fire. I reached across the console and pulled her into a hug, the tulle of her dress scratching my cheek, the smell of expensive perfume mixing with the scent of old oil and upholstery, and we sat there for a long time, father and daughter, rebuilding the bridge that Julian had tried to burn. If this story gave you hope that it's never too late to save someone you love, let me know in the comments, because that hug was worth more than the deed in my pocket. We eventually got out of the truck, the night air cool on our faces, and I walked up the steps to the front door, the keys jingling in my hand, a sound of ownership, of permanence. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open, flipping the switch that bathed the entryway in warm, golden light. The house was empty, echoing, smelling of fresh paint and possibility. Jessica walked in slowly, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors I had paid cash to have refinished, trailing her hand along the banister as if checking to see if it was a mirage. She walked from room to room, the kitchen with the island where I imagined her baking, the living room with the fireplace where I imagined Christmas stockings, and finally the nursery upstairs, painted a soft, neutral yellow, waiting for a life that hadn't even begun yet. She stood in the center of that empty room and spun around slowly, the weight of the gift finally hitting her. "He told me we would never have a house," she whispered to the walls. "He said we had to rent a condo in the city to maintain appearances. He said houses were for people who gave up on ambition." "He lied," I said, standing in the doorway. "Ambition isn't about looking rich, Jess. It's about building something that lasts. This wall's, they're real. The land outside, it's real." Julian was a hologram, and you can't live inside a hologram. The reality of Julian's deception unraveled over the next few weeks with a speed and ferocity that shocked even me. It turned out the wedding fiasco was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. 2 days after the wedding that wasn't, the news broke that Julian Ashton had been arrested not just for the credit card fraud at the venue, but for running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that targeted the very socialites he was desperate to impress. He had been taking investment money from his friends' parents, promising high returns in tech startups that didn't exist, and using the cash to fund his Armani suits, his leased sports cars, and the lavish parties meant to attract more victims. The firm he ran was a shell company with a P.O. box and a flashy website. The magazine feature he was so obsessed with wasn't just for vanity. It was a desperate attempt to legitimize his brand before the SEC auditors arrived. He needed the wedding photos to prove he was stable, to prove he was part of the elite, to keep the con going for just a few more months. And I, the useless mechanic, had inadvertently pulled the pin on his grenade by refusing to be the silent prop in his stage play. I remember sitting on the porch of the new house a week later, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug, reading the local paper where Julian's mugshot was plastered on the front page. He looked haggard, stripped of his bronzer and his bravado, a small man in a gray jumpsuit, and feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. But the fallout wasn't just legal, it was social, and watching Alina's empire crumble was a tragedy of its own making. The woman who had sneered at my suit and called me a peasant was now a pariah. The country club revoked her membership, her friends stopped returning her calls, and rumor had it she was forced to sell her jewelry, the real pieces anyway, to pay for Julian's defense attorney, who eventually quit because the retainer check bounced. It was a complete dismantling of a dynasty that never really existed. Jessica took it hard at first, the embarrassment of it all, the realization that she had been sleeping next to a criminal, but she was stronger than I gave her credit for. She moved into the house on Willow Creek Lane not as a guest but as a resident. She sold the engagement ring, which ironically turned out to be the only thing Julian had actually paid for, likely with stolen money, and used the funds to pay back the vendors who had been stiffed at the wedding. She called the florist, the band, and even the young DJ, writing checks and apologizing profusely, reclaiming her name from the wreckage of the Ashton scandal. It was a humbling process watching her make those calls, watching her face flush with shame and then settle into resolve, but it was necessary. She was scrubbing the tarnish off her soul. One afternoon, about a month after the incident, I was in the backyard fixing the fence, the sun beating down on my neck, when Jessica came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, looking more like the daughter I raised than the socialite she had tried to be. She handed me a glass and leaned against the post I was sanding. "Dad," she said, looking out at the tree line, "I realized something today." "What's that?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. "I realized that for the last 3 years I never felt safe. I was always anxious, always worrying if I was wearing the right thing, saying the right thing, if the car payment would clear. I thought that was just what success felt like, stress." She took a sip of lemonade, the ice clinking. "But being here, waking up in a house that's paid for, eating dinner with you on a table we built, it's the first time I've breathed in years." She looked at me, tears welling up again, but happy tears this time. "You saved me, Dad, and I don't just mean financially. You saved me from becoming a leaner." I chuckled, taking a long drink. "That," I said, "is the best return on investment I could ever ask for." If you believe that true wealth is the peace of mind that comes from honesty, hit that like button because that is a lesson that cost us a lot to learn. But the story has one final twist, a moment of poetic justice that the universe delivered to my doorstep 6 months later. I was at the shop. I still went in a few days a week, not because I had to, but because I loved the work. When a black sedan pulled up, a man in a suit got out, looking uncomfortable in the gritty environment of an auto repair shop. It was the bankruptcy trustee handling the liquidation of Julian's assets. He walked into the office, looking around at the fan belts hanging on the wall and the smell of grease. "Mr. Miller," he asked. "I'm Arthur," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "What can I do for you?" "I understand you were a creditor of sorts for Julian Ashton," he said, choosing his words carefully. "In a manner of speaking," I replied, "he owes my daughter a lot of time, but I doubt you can auction that off." The trustee allowed a dry smile. "No, sir. But we are auctioning off the tangible assets to pay back the victims. There's one item in particular that's proving difficult to move because of the emotional baggage attached to it. It's a vintage Rolls-Royce, 1965, Silver Cloud. It was the car he used for the wedding. It was technically owned by his firm, so it's up for grabs." I froze. The Rolls-Royce. The car Jessica had arrived in, looking sad and managed. The car Julian had checked his reflection in while his bride stood ignored. "Much?" I asked. "Well, given the condition and the notoriety, we're looking for a quick sale, 20,000. I looked at my bank account app on my phone. I had rebuilt my savings since buying the house thanks to the shop doing well and my frugal habits. "I'll take it," I said. "Cash." The trustee looked stunned. You want the car your son-in-law used to defraud people?" "No," I said, smiling. "I want the car my daughter deserved to ride in as a free woman." I bought it. I brought it to the shop. I spent 3 months stripping it down, cleaning every inch of Julian's stench out of it, rebuilding the engine, polishing the chrome until it gleamed like a mirror. And on Jessica's birthday, I pulled it into the driveway of the house on Willow Creek Lane. She walked out onto the porch, her coffee cup freezing in her hand. "Dad," she gasped. "Is that—" "It's the car," I said, leaning against the fender. "But it's different now. It's got a new engine, new upholstery, and a new owner." I tossed her the keys. "It's not for show, Jess. It's for Sunday drives. It's for ice cream runs. It's for whatever you want because you own the ride now. It doesn't own you." She ran down the steps and hugged me, laughing, a sound that rang through the trees and chased away the last ghosts of the wedding. We took it for a drive that afternoon, the top down, the wind in our hair, and as we drove through town, we passed the county jail. I slowed down just for a second. I didn't know which cell Julian was in. He had been sentenced to 4 years for fraud, but I like to imagine he could hear the engine of the car he used to fake his status, now driven by the woman he underestimated and the mechanic he despised. It was petty maybe, but it felt good. We drove past the country club and I didn't feel a thing. No anger, no shame, just indifference. Because I knew that the people inside, with their debt and their posturing, were trapped in a prison of their own making, while we were out here on the open road with a paid-off house and a clean conscience. Jessica eventually went back to school studying landscape architecture, using the land around the house as her canvas. She met a guy a year later, a teacher named Mark, who drove a Honda Civic and shook my hand firmly, looking me in the eye. He didn't care about magazine spreads. He cared about Jessica. And when they got married 2 years after the disaster, it wasn't in a ballroom. It was in the backyard of Willow Creek Lane under the big oak tree. There were no security guards, no declined credit cards. I wore my charcoal suit, the same one, proudly, and this time when I walked my daughter down the aisle, which was just the grass path between the hydrangeas she had planted, she held my arm so tight I thought she'd cut off my circulation. We laughed, we cried. We ate barbecue served by Tony the caterer, who insisted on doing the job at cost because he loved a happy ending. And as I stood there watching my daughter dance with a man who actually loved her, holding a beer and looking at the home I had provided, I realized that Julian was right about one thing: I didn't fit his aesthetic, and thank God for that. Because his aesthetic was a cage and mine was a kingdom. If this story gave you hope, if it made you want to call your dad, or if it just reminded you that the truth always wins in the end, hit that subscribe button. And remember, never let anyone make you feel small in a room you helped build. I'm Arthur Miller and I approved this message.